Stories have amazing power. The stories of history, of scripture, literature, conversation, and even imagination. Stories can be an enthralling contradiction of historical truths. Accounts of good times or hardships encountered in our youth. I've always been fascinated by stories. Whether it was a bedtime story, an over-enlarged tale by my extravagant uncle, a mystery novel I could lose myself in, or a moment transported back in history.
I signed up for that.
You bought coffee, you'll be okay.
Yeah, okay. Morning.
Morning. I've got to admit that, with Snow Camp on this weekend, I did say to Roz, what should we do? Should we wander along to church or not? And Roz did say, Jill speaking, we will definitely be there. So we do appreciate, you coming along and being part of our extended family and all that you share and the gift that you have for presenting and making Christianity alive. But we do have some good phone questions for you, so let's see where we get to. Jill, can you tell me, what is your favourite ethnic food?
Oh. When I'm in the United States, America, as Rudy called it, and Jesslyn, is that her name? Jessie Lee? She doesn't understand American, but when I'm in America, it would be Mexican food. But the further you get away from Mexico, the worse the Mexican food gets. So you don't want to eat Mexican food like in India or somewhere like that. So Mexican food when I'm in the States, but here in New Zealand, wow, we just have so many options. I love a good Thai salad, Indian.
Favourite Thai restaurant in Auckland? Have you done Kim?
Oh, they keep changing. Yeah, they keep changing hands. So I don't know. Do you have a favorite?
We go to Kim Pong Tong in just Melbourne, which is really, really nice.
Where?
It's just over the back from the back of where the bank and the service station on the other side.
Near Nando's.
No, on the other side of that.
We'll have to meet up around there.
Yeah, we should definitely do that. All right, question 2. What was the worst haircut you've ever had?
Oh, man. When you have naturally curly hair, you have to be very careful about where you go. The $10 haircut thingies that you can just pop in and pop out and they do you in 3 minutes, not a good option. I had long hair that I tried to think that it was straightish, and it really wasn't. But I needed to change my style when I was at Bible college, and so I just went up to the road. This was in Tennessee. Have you ever seen any television shows about Tennessee? Yeah, they talk funny. You guys definitely wouldn't understand some of them. And this particular woman was in Kimberlin Heights, Tennessee, which had a dairy and a mailbox and her. But it was right across the street from the campus, so I could get there. I should have known. You got to go into town at least. And I came out with wings. So the way she cut it and into the curl, I came out with, I think it's the only haircut I've ever cried over.
This is where you hope we don't go, and we've got a picture, right?
No, you don't have a picture of that one.
We don't. But that would be good.
Yeah, Shay and I did talk about getting some pictures of me before.
All right. If you could shop for free at one store, which one would you choose?
Apple Store.
Good choice. Anything particular there?
Oh, I don't know. I don't need anything. But I've got a MacBook Air, and it's about 3.5 years old now. And 4 is about the outside limit on some of those things now.
And they're not cheap to replace.
And they're not cheap to replace. So, yeah, if anybody would like to buy a 3.5-year-old MacBook Air and at a really good price, and then, yeah.
See you afterwards.
So the Apple Store is pretty good. But otherwise, a bookstore.
Yes.
When we had Borders at the mall,
Yeah.
my day off, I would just go there and
Or the one in town that used to
that
be
was
in
the
town,
best
that was
because,
fantastic.
and it would take my whole day off because I would get lost in the bowels of that building. Do some of you remember that? You go downstairs and downstairs and downstairs and then you can't get out? Yeah. I
That
think
was
it's
a day
ploy.
out. Coffee and books.
The religion section was all the way down and at the back, as they do. And I get down there and I couldn't get out.
Definitely relate to that. All right, this sounds like a question my son wrote. What secret superpower would you like to have?
Snap my finger and be in any country for dinner without flying and no jet lag. So like I could snap my fingers and be in India with my friends, in Chennai or up in northeast of Delhi, and then I could snap my fingers and I could have, like lunch in India and dinner in Zimbabwe and snap my fingers again and have breakfast in the UK. And
You could actually, with the time zones, you could skip breakfast because no one really likes breakfast. You could just go dinner, right? Move
Yeah,
around the time zones.
yeah. Well, in some of those countries, though, breakfast isn't any different from lunch or dinner. They serve olives and cold meats and just all this weird stuff at breakfast as well. And you're like, that looks like lunch. So yeah, you could skip breakfast.
That sounds
Yeah, that would be good. Problem is, I have arthritis, so snapping my fingers is a little tricky. So maybe I need to just tap on my nose or something. That would be my superpower. I thought these were going to be embarrassing. These are easy.
All right, this is one of my questions. So 4 years on from now, we've just had the Olympics. I'm going to turn on the radio and I hear overnight New Zealand's success. Jill Shaw has won a gold medal.
I have never even contemplated anything that I was a long jumper. Do they still do long jump? You run up to that line and then you jump. I had our school record for a while on that, which isn't too shabby when you consider how short I am.
That's very impressive.
Yeah, I really like volleyball too, but when I watch the Olympics, sometimes I just need to take some anti-inflammatories just watching because it looks painful the way they hit the floor and then bounce back up. I don't know how the rugby guys do that. They're falling down the whole stinking game and they're getting back up, like instantly to make the next tackle.
Yeah, look, I'm learning very quickly that doesn't quite happen as it used to.
No.
That bouncing back.
So yeah, either long jump, though that's kind of boring because you do the whole Olympics and you jump like 3 times.
Go for double gold medal then in long jump and volleyball. Fair enough. Last question. What is your biggest fear?
Now we're getting personal. Pretty much my whole life, my biggest fear has been failure. Failure. That's a real honest, vulnerable kind of a thing, So what that means is there have been times along the way when I haven't attempted to do something because I might fail. I went into my first piano lesson, and it lasted about an hour. And I don't know what it cost back then, but at the end, I couldn't play the piano, so I never went back. Things should just come naturally, and you should just be able to do it right from the get-go. Or there's probably a name for people like me, but I don't know what it is. But fear of failure.
I think it's called New Zealander.
Oh.
No, honestly, they were saying, I saw a program the other day talking about New Zealand's fear of failure and how it keeps us back because, failure is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. It is. You gain wisdom by failing, and that's some of what I do plan to talk about today. So I've tried all kinds of crazy things. That doesn't really make sense in a way because I've attempted some unusual things along the way, but that's one thing. I have to keep trying to overcome that fear.
Thank you so much for sharing.
You're
We
very
really
welcome.
do appreciate that. And actually, thank you so much for being here because I know you're not 100%. Your voice isn't. But you're willing to be here and you're willing to share for us. So we actually do have a bit of a care package here for you because we want to make sure you stay
Thank
in
you.
good health.
Oh.
And I think that's as much as anything because Shay really didn't want to preach today. So she's really, really thankful that you're here.
This has just about everything this is brilliant. Thank you.
Some
There's
yummy tea.
tissues and strepsils and Vicks stuff and and antibacterial stuff so none of you get what I've got, and a lovely candle. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of our Gracegate family, and thank you for being willing to share your story.
You're very welcome. And I was able to be here a couple weeks ago when Cy Rogers spoke, and I didn't get to linger. He went on a little bit longer than what I had allocated, so I didn't get a chance to talk to many of you. But I hope to bring a group along as well when the surfer is here, because I just think that's just an amazing story. To be able to share these stories of people overcoming things is just great. So if I'm going to be bringing along, some extra people, I wonder who you know who might benefit from that day and that event and that story. It's a pretty tame thing to invite a friend along to, isn't it? It's not like you're inviting him to church. So it's a pretty good option.
Surfing. Who doesn't love surfing? Who doesn't know people who are so enthusiastic about surfing?
I like
So
to
it's a
watch
good
it.
lead-in.
I like to watch it. Water's too cold in New Zealand.
Linda, I leave to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I do kind of need to cough right now, so if you guys could turn the volume down just for a minute. I am probably not contagious anymore, or I would put my arm up over there. It's just a lingering kind of thing that I'm still just trying to get rid of. So I did tell Shay yesterday, though, when I talked with her that, if I'm not well enough tomorrow, then you're it. She said, that's not funny. Wes told me the same thing. So I thought that was pretty funny that she'd kind of got that message a couple of different times. I said, I'll give you my notes, Shay could have told my story off these notes and would have confused people who've known you quite a long time. But I was invited today to come along and to share my story. Now, as I told Glennie before the service today, I really had to edit it quite a bit because after 50-some years, you just can't tell everything or we'd be here all day, wouldn't we? So I've had to edit a little bit, and I'm going to skim over some parts and just sort of give you the highlights and the lowlights. And to do that, I've written it out a little bit more than I sometimes do, because otherwise I'll get caught up in my own story, and you know how bad that could be. We could be here all day. So I'm going to do that, and then at the end, if there's anything kind of pertinent or anything that kind of percolates to the top a little bit and seems like we want to go a little bit deeper, Glennie's going to come up and just explore a couple of things with me maybe at the end. So that's kind of how I foresee this kind of going. Now, I'm a reader. I read quite a lot, and when I was little, I had no idea that I was going to be able to travel the world. I had no idea that God would take me to over 50 countries, I think it is now. 10 of those were just in Southern Africa, because you can just drive to all of them. When you live in New Zealand, you can't rack up as many countries, can you? You've got to really make an effort. But I read quite a lot when I was a kid, and I really enjoyed reading biography. The stories of people who had lived meaningful lives. Some of them didn't change the world, and they didn't, do anything that you might think would warrant headlines or whatever. But the biographies, and a well-written biography is a brilliant thing. You can glean the wisdom, and you can see the events as they unfold, and then you can see the outcomes, and it kind of puts it in a nice capsule form. So I'm not going to give you my whole biography as such, but I am here to tell you part of my story. And I'd be happy to talk with any of you afterwards if there's a certain touch point or a common ground that you find in it. Now, in my line of work as a Bible teacher and as a chaplain and as a discipler, I also get to tell the story of lots of misfits that we read about in the Bible. It's easier sometimes telling their stories than it is telling my own. But when you look on the screen and you see some of those people, some of you who've read a good bit of the Old Testament, and most of those are Old Testament, some are new. Do those look like the kind of people that you'd want to include in the story? They do add flavor. They do spice things up a little bit. But there are times when I look back through the Bible and I think, if I'd been the one writing the Bible, I would have left out a lot of that stuff. But I'm just always fascinated by the fact that God worked through those misfits. Andy works through me. And I could be right in there amongst, many of those with some of the different things that you'll see up there. I've never been dead yet, but other than that, I've touched on a few of those different things. But telling your own story, it makes you a little bit vulnerable. And so I'm going to share a few things today. And whether you'll never want to come and listen to me again when I'm speaking on other things at Gracegate, or whether you'll think, oh yeah, she's grounded, I'll listen to her, however it comes out, all right? I'm going to run through a little list here. It's my story. Mental illness runs in my family. A grandfather and an uncle were institutionalized back in the day when the options were few. Another uncle actually committed suicide. I have several relatives who are homosexual. If any of you are any of my friends on Facebook or anything like that, you'll notice that I'm trying to be very careful in how I post things and what I'm for and against on Facebook, because I have all kinds of friends on Facebook. And sometimes some of those difficult things, I'd rather not just put my stake in the ground and make a harsh statement, but I'd really rather have a conversation with them. So I have lots of relatives and several friends who are homosexual. My parents divorced when I was 16. After that, there was a family in our church who wouldn't let their daughter run around with me anymore, because surely I was going to be a juvenile delinquent because I came from a broken home. My oldest nephew is a tattoo artist when he's not in prison. He's a brilliant artist, and I often tell him that, the price he gets for a tattoo is this, and the price he could get for even commercial art or other, but my nephew's daughter is in the care of her grandmother's because my nephew doesn't fulfill his obligations to her. See, usually you don't have to deal with all this part of Jill because this is all far away, isn't it? And often people don't wonder about your family who lives in another country. They don't ask you questions about all of that because that's irrelevant. We're just here today. We're talking about this. We got the All Blacks playing tonight. This is what matters. But this is part of my story. So through the years, I've received emails. Can you buy me a bus ticket to such and such a place? There's a job there, and then I could send the money back to Haley. So I arranged for the bus ticket. He went. He got lonely. He found his way back north to his girlfriend. None of the money ever got to Haley. So then you have to ask, what about next time? What do you do? These are the kinds of things that I deal with when I'm not, up here talking to you guys about Jesus and discipleship and stuff. I nursed my mom through the final stages of lung cancer. But at the same time, my best friend in Africa was dying of AIDS. So that superpower of where I wish I could tap my nose and be in two countries, that would have come in handy. My grandmother had dementia. She had Alzheimer's. And she lost her dignity long before the end. My father would go each week and spend pretty much the whole day, at least the whole afternoon, with her so that my grandfather could go out and play golf and get out of the house. And I was over here at that time, and so I wasn't much help to him. My dad is now 76. He's not very well. He hasn't been very well for a while, and I could receive a phone call, at any time. So there's different stages in our life. There's a stage where, you're young and you're running around doing your own thing, and then there gets to be this stage where you kind of have to take care of those who took care of you. I am happily single with no children. Heterosexual as far as I know. Some of you will get that. I've moved to a new country twice and had to rebuild my circle of family and friends. That's a challenging thing to do. Some of you have done that. You've moved and you've left behind all the cousins and all the birthday parties and the anniversaries and the funerals and the weddings and the whatever, and you've moved here and you've been like, right, great. Now what do we do for fun? How do we make friends? How do we connect? That's a challenge. I've done it twice. First to Zimbabwe in 1984, and then coming here in 1999. I'm pleased to say that I've survived a round with melanoma. That was over 5 years ago, so a couple of surgeries with that and a lot of unknowns. And I've survived over 30 years in church ministry. That's daunting as well. There's different kinds of daunting challenges that come to us. Some of my closest friends have had affairs, addictions, mental illness. You know, and it's one thing to be in ministry and doing things professionally, but it's something else when it's a friend and it's a personal kind of a thing. It's challenging. Others of my friends have never had any of these obvious stigmas or challenges or whatever. They live very comfy houses and in those picturesque homes that you see in some of the movies and the sitcoms of America. But they can be very smug and legalistic and think that only Christians of their flavor are the ones who are going to get in. Some of them will even vote for Trump. But that's just the highlights of my life. Are you ready to get on with some more of it? Mostly, along the way, I remember God's faithfulness. It's fun looking back. It's fun being asked to do this, actually, because in looking back, I get to see things and kind of put them in an order that makes sense so that I can tell the story. And I remember God's faithfulness. I mentioned my mom and me being able to nurse her through the final stages of cancer. I was in America. It was in 1995. I've lived in Zimbabwe for many years by then. But when all this happened and the severity of it, I was in the United States. And it was not a big decision by the elders of the church, who are the authorities over my ministry, for them to say, stay. But if I'd been in Zimbabwe, and we got the diagnosis, and then I'd had to fly to the States and, whatever, would it be 6 months? Would it be a year? Would it be 8? You don't know. And so God has been faithful to make the least pleasant things in my life happen at the most convenient times possible. That may sound odd. That may sound like a weird way of framing things. But the same thing was true with my uncle. My mom's brother never married, so he had we assume he had no children. And so when he got so sick, again, I was in the United States, and my brother rang me and he said, Uncle Tom's in the hospital. My brother hates hospitals, being in them or visiting them or anything. And he said, I'll take care of his flat, which is a mess because he had been unwell for a little while, if you'll take care of the hospital part. And I said, yes, of course I will. So I was able to get back to our hometown, and I was able to be there. And Uncle Tom asked for two things. He said, I'd like to die with dignity, and I'd like to not be alone. And I said, we'll do our best. I'll be here. We'll do the best that we can. And so I was in the United States. See, I have been of nearly no use to my family for 30 years, being overseas. And so being able to be there at a couple of those times, that really mattered to them. That was really good. So God's faithfulness is one of the main things. The other thing that I've constantly been reminded of over the years is purpose and preparation. Purpose and preparation. In each little thing that I do, there is purpose. There is value. There is something that God wants me to do. And, it may be to babysit for somebody. It may be to have an ice cream with a young person. It may be to, who knows, any little thing that we do along the way. But the interesting thing about that, or some of these experiences even that I've had, some of the challenging experiences, there's been purpose in them. But there's also been preparation for things I didn't even know yet were coming. And so years later, I would get down the road and something would come up and I would think, even then God was preparing me for something that I might need to do down there. But to have that, we need to pay attention a little bit to God's faithfulness to us over time so that we can connect those dots and see the purpose and preparation. So some of the preparation that I had, some of the blessings that I had, was I grew up in a good church with a good youth group. And Gracegate reminds me of that church a little bit, about how everybody loves each other. Now that church was older than this church, just as far as years of existence. But you guys are onto a good thing, and you're creating and shaping a really good thing here. And the thing is, when I was one of those noisy little wiggly girls giggling in the corner during kids' church, none of my Sunday school teachers or disciplers or small group leaders or youth, they had no idea that God would use me in so many different cultures and countries, around the world. And I'm not saying that I, have done amazing things. God has done the amazing things. But you never know who you're investing in and then what God might do through them. So keep that up. You're doing a good job with that. I had wise mentors and disciplers all through my teens. To name the names of those people. And that's one of the reasons why discipleship is so important to me today. Because what they did for me, everybody should have that opportunity of somebody to walk beside you and be able to help you navigate through life and calibrate your life again to the Lordship of Jesus Christ and see what Scripture has to say about how to live, in the everydayness of stuff. And that's what discipling is, and I'm just so grateful. Now, my mother says I was born independent. I don't know. I wasn't paying attention. She also said I was born inquisitive, that I didn't just get to the why thing, at the stage other children do, but I was asking it well before then. But being independent and being inquisitive has really served me well through the years. My parents divorced when I was 16. There had to be something in what God did through that season of my life that then allowed me to be independent enough that I could go to Africa when I was 22. Could you imagine sending your daughter to Africa at 22? Not today. I mean, when I was 22, there were different expectations and, it was a different season. But I went to Africa when I was 22. I thought I'd stay there for 3 years, and I stayed for 13. It's interesting. But if my mom and dad had still been together, if my family home had just been that happy place where Christmas was like you see it in the postcards, going to Africa would have been much harder. It would have been harder to leave that. So God used an unfortunate thing, a thing that he never would have ordained, and he didn't plan that, but he used it. And he used it to shape me to be what I needed to be. Now, when I went to university, I went to Indiana University, and I studied journalism. And when I got there, of course, I came out of this youth group. I had been discipled. I wanted to be a good influence for Christ in my community, in my university. But I couldn't explain the gospel in a way that those liberal, political, horrible, mean, antagonistic people at the university would understand. I couldn't take it outside of the churchy terms and put it into something that would communicate well in that very politically charged environment. And so I went to Bible college for 1 year so that I would get up to speed on apologetics and I could defend my faith and present it well to people who didn't really want to hear it. And then in time, while I was at Bible college, I ended up going into intercultural communications and Bible, and I went off to Africa to be a missionary instead. And so I never got to go back to the journalism program that I had started. But I went to Africa at 22, and there I learned so much. Those amazing, wise, illiterate people in the villages just taught me things I never would have even known to ask about. I served with horrible missionaries at first, and that has helped me through the years to mentor other new missionaries to say, yeah, just because somebody's a missionary doesn't mean that they've got it all together. And so suck it up. Either God called you or he didn't, and kind of get on with it. I've also been able to serve with brilliant missionaries who later helped me they modeled for me and helped me to see, practical wisdom and cooperative ministry with the locals and transition management and just so many different things. So I had good examples and bad examples. Serving in Zimbabwe prepared me to live in New Zealand. It taught me to drink tea properly, which side of the road to drive on, and how to spell. Teaching at a Bible college in Zimbabwe just was amazing. Managing a famine relief project. God, me, and a small group of Africans fed over 16,000 children in Zimbabwe for more than 6 months during a famine in 91. I didn't ever take Famine 101 at college or university, and so we just had to learn that and figure that out as we went, but God did good things. I did a mapping initiative for HIV/AIDS to see what was being done in Zimbabwe and where the gaps were. I learned to be observant and discerning in a culture where I was a very conspicuous outsider all the time. I'd walk into a room, and I was the only white person amongst 90,000 Africans, for about 6 months in southern Zimbabwe, in a certain region where I was. So anytime you walked into a room, everybody knew, oh, she's here. Even they always used to talk about how we had our conferences on a full moon. Whenever there was a full moon weekend was when we would have our conferences, and then they could always find me because I would glow in the dark. Leaving Zimbabwe was not my choice. That was a hard thing. That was a major disappointment. Mugabe even then was closing the doors to outsiders. But processing that disappointment helps me then when I'm mentoring other people and they have disappointments. The different kinds of disappointments, and waiting. After that, waiting to discern, what did God want me to do next? I went to Ethiopia from Zimbabwe. I went to Ethiopia, checked that out. I even left things there, thinking I'd return. But that wasn't the door that I was supposed to go through. So waiting then. Went to a conference in the United States, saw a lot of people that I knew, a lot of ministry people from Bible college and different churches, and all of them were asking me the same question. What are you doing next? Where are you going? Good to see you. How are you going? What are you doing next? I had a panic attack at a conference because I didn't have the answers to their questions. And I'm not good at waiting. I'm not good at that unknown space in between. But it was good for me later. Arriving in New Zealand where people either embrace Americans just because they're American and it's just an amazingly big country and, I speak your language because I watch television, to meeting people who don't like me because I'm American. I don't want you to like me or not like me because I'm American. What's that got to do with anything? It ought to be a personal thing. But it's tricky sometimes living in those spaces of being a foreigner all the time. Some of you know. And then to end up representing Christ in a university as a chaplain. Remember me going to Indiana University and not being able to hold my own? And now one of my major roles is a chaplain at Massey University right over here in Albany. Again, an antagonistic place where Jesus followers are just thought to be a little bit off, a little bit odd, a little bit simple, maybe. And yet, now I think I'm ready to represent Christ in that space. When I was 20, when I was 19, maybe not so much. So there are bits of my story. It includes some low times. It includes some loneliness. It includes some struggle. I have to edit it because we're out of time. But the thing is, when I read in Scripture, and I see the different stories of the people that I named and were up on the screen earlier. They were ordinary people. They just tried to live their lives, some of them faithful to what they knew God was doing. And that's what I do. And that's what many of you do. I know you. I've talked to some of you. I know your stories. One of the things, though, is I think it's helpful for us to live life knowing that all of us are wounded. I don't know how we can live to be the age of most of us in this room today and not be wounded a little bit. And one of the things that I've learned is that the painful experiences have taught me the most valuable lessons. The painful experiences in my life have taught me far more than the good times, than the celebration. And I heard about this some time ago, and I think it's been mentioned here as well. I can't pronounce that. Kintsugi? Anybody speak Japanese? Kintsugi is the Japanese method for repairing broken ceramics, and they rub it with a lacquer that has been mixed with gold or silver or different kinds of beautiful minerals, and they rub and rub and rub and rub and rub and rub and rub the gold or the different beautiful minerals into the cracks. And I'm cracked. I am broken in a few places, and life does that. Life just does that to us. But I'd like to think that God takes those cracks and those wounds and those struggles, and he makes something beautiful out of them. And in this case, the philosophy behind this Japanese technique is to recognize the history of the object. It's just easy to go buy a new bowl. It's just easy to have a perfect bowl. And you know, some of us try to pretend that we're perfect and we've got it all together. How's that working for you? Exhausting, isn't it? You know, wouldn't it be better just to say, I got some cracks? So the history of the object is important, and they want to visibly incorporate the repair into the new piece instead of disguising it. I just sometimes think it's easier to disguise it and just to pretend that it's easy or that it's right or that everything's okay. The process usually results in something more beautiful than the original. There are a lot of wounded people I know, a lot of wise people I know. And they are beautiful, and they are wiser, and they are more gracious, and they're more generous, and they're more considerate because of their woundedness, because of the cracks, and because of the struggle. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes people just get cranky. But often, with God, with the Holy Spirit, with a submission and a surrender to what God is doing in our lives, we can end up being more beautiful. You reckon that's true of your story? Now, I don't know all of your stories. Some of you have other heartache. I am not the child of an alcoholic. I have never been betrayed in a marriage. I do not have a child with a disability for whom I need to be concerned and planned for when I'm no longer here. Some of my friends do. That's hard. The list of heart-wrenching concerns, you know, that we would know amongst ourselves and amongst our family and our friends, the list of heart-wrenching concerns that are part of living in a corrupted world are many. But you know, it's the things we've suffered, our weaknesses and our failures and our mistakes. It's those things that qualify us to serve others. It's the things we've suffered, our weaknesses, failures, and mistakes that qualify us best for ministering to others. It brings us down onto a common ground, onto a level playing field where none of us quite have it right. And somehow God's glory shines through when we're fallible jars of clay, rather than when we're that shiny, polished, crystal that nobody wants to touch. I've learned to recognize that Jesus is the author of my story. In Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, verse 2, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. He's the author and the perfecter. Faith isn't perfect just like that. It becomes perfect. Perfect is another word for complete or mature. The author and the completer, the maturer of my faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Do you know why Jesus is sitting at the right hand at the throne of God? He's sitting there so that he can intercede for us. He's sitting there so that he can represent us to God, so that when we pray, our prayers go right through Jesus and right to God, and God hears us. It's a beautiful thing. I'll be 55 next year. My mom died at 55. Her story was cut a little bit short. Many are. But one of the things that I realized is it's not really about the length of the story. It's about the value embedded in the story that matters so very much. A young man's going to come here on September 10th and tell you his story about surfing. Does anybody know how old he is? But there's value in his story. There's a lot of value in that story, and somebody's going to connect with it, so please invite your friends. For those of you who want it, your story has been redeemed. My story has been redeemed. I get to use a lot of those bits and the highlights or the low points or whatever. I get to use those all the time in my ministry. Your story has been redeemed, most of us. So we need to stop looking at ourselves, and we need to acknowledge what Jesus has accomplished on the cross. And we need to keep our eyes on him at the same time that we're looking around to see how we can be a blessing to somebody else. He redeemed you. He redeemed you for a purpose. He redeemed you to bring glory and honor to him. He gave you gifts, talents, and abilities to be a blessing to other people. Are you? Are you telling your story in a way that it will bless somebody else? Or are you wasting it? Because, I reckon a story that's full of struggle and heartache and challenge and whatever, if you don't turn it into a blessing where you tell others, you just struggled for no reason. But let it bless other people. And what I've learned in my obedience, in trying to bless other people and serve, is that even a little bit of obedience. I went to Africa for 3 years. You think that was a big leap, and it was in a way. But I went for 3 years. I didn't go for 30. I had no idea I was going to end up here today. I just thought I'll do this little stint. I'll teach in a school for 3 years. That's it. I'll go home to the States. Maybe I'll meet Prince Charming. But God blessed my obedience, and he blessed it with more faith. And it's a good thing that famine didn't happen in 1984, because I wouldn't have been ready for it. I was ready for it later on. So he blesses our obedience with more faith, and then we're able to obey more, and then he blesses it with more faith, and then we're able to obey. And the next thing you know, you feel like you have superpowers. Not really. You know that you're not. And so I encourage you to be obedient. Now, some of you don't know what I'm talking about. You don't know the Lordship of Jesus Christ. You don't know that God is on your side. Some of you might think I'm a little bit nuts, and that's okay. You fumble along, and you try to write your story on your own way. How's that going for you? There'll be some good places along the way. There'll be some smooth sailing, some cruising. But then there'll be some times when you crash. And I just think of all those at snow camp right now. The glory of going down those hills and those slopes and whatever, it all looks good until they end up in a tumble at the bottom of the hill. And I think that's sometimes how life is like. But if you fumble along and you try to write your own story, it won't end well. So I really encourage you to surrender the direction, the plot, the outcome of your story to Jesus. Let him be the author of that. In Hebrews chapter 4, it says, we have a great high priest. We have a great high priest, that's Jesus, who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold firmly to the faith we profess, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness. But we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's grace, God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive the mercy that we need, and will find grace to help us in our time of need. He is approachable. He's accessible. He's available. He loves you. He sits there now, waiting to hear the prayer. Let Jesus redeem your backstory, and let him co-author the rest of your story. We don't have a microphone for Glennie. Sorry. Oh, look who's coming. I don't think I'm contagious, but you may not want to sit too close.
I've been blessed, Jill, by what you've shared with us this morning. And actually, I've been blessed by you for so many years. In fact, I think probably all of the 17 years that you've been in New Zealand, I've been blessed to know Jill. And Jill is a great mentor. The experiences I've had and the things I've learned, the depths that she goes into in life group, wonderful ministry that Jill has, and thank you, Jill, for
The blessing
sharing
has
with
been
us this
mutual
morning.
over the years.
And being vulnerable. Vulnerability is a great strength, and it's something that I've got a lot to learn in that area. My grandmother often used to say, quoting scripture, that we shouldn't become weary in well-doing. And, you know, I used to interpret that as like, don't overdo it because you'll get weary.
I hadn't thought of it that way. That is one way to look at it.
Then I come to realise that it actually meant the very opposite of that. But Jill, there must be times when you get weary. So, how do you deal with the weariness of constantly giving?
I'm so grateful that New Zealand has gorgeous, amazing native birds. Because when I go out and first when I can hear the birds, this morning I heard them singing after they had hunkered down all night with that horrible storm. But when I get weary, my day off often, I'll take binoculars or a camera that's never adequate for birds, and I'll just go and I'll try to find some place that's quiet, because often the enormity of the problems and the challenges that we face with people and the sadness of the stories that we hear, it just gets to be a bit much. But when I get out and I see the glory and the beauty of New Zealand, I realize that God created all of that. My God gets big. I then fit back into my rightful place, and the problems and the things that need to be managed, well, you know, he and I together can do them, or anyway, he's bigger than all of that. So he refreshes me, you know, in that way. I need my alone time. Believe it or not, on those crazy charts and those tests and things that you can take, I'm an introvert. Just barely, but I am an introvert. So I get my strength and my energy from being alone.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jill, for sharing your story this morning
You're very
with
welcome.
us, and all the many times that you come here and lead us to a place that we might not have gone to otherwise.
I find it easy coming to Gracegate. I enjoy coming here because the people I see over and over and over again, you know, the faithful, just the love of God and the love of community and the love of people who don't yet know Jesus is just very evident in this church. So I love being a part of this.